Joshua 5, verse 1 to 9 marks a turning point. Israel has crossed the Jordan, entered the land, and now stands at the threshold of inheritance. Yet before conquest begins, God calls the people to rest in covenant identity rather than military strength. The passage reveals the removal of shame, the end of wilderness wandering, and the beginning of a new covenantal reality centered on trust in God's finished work rather than human effort. The kings of the Amorites and Canaanites melt with fear when they hear that the waters of the Jordan dried up before Israel. Their hearts fail because God Himself has acted on behalf of His people. Israel's victory does not begin with warfare, but with divine accomplishment. Before a sword is lifted, the enemy already trembles. This demonstrates that God's people do not establish victory through striving. They enter into what God has already secured. At this moment, Joshua is commanded to circumcise the sons of Israel. The previous generation had died in the wilderness, and the new generation had not received the covenant sign. Circumcision represented separation unto God, but it also pointed beyond the physical act toward a deeper reality of the heart. Even within the Hebrew scriptures, the outward sign was never the final goal. God desired a people whose hearts were made new, whose fleshly confidence was cut away, and whose identity rested entirely in Him. The wilderness generation represents humanity living under fear, unbelief, and bondage to performance. Though delivered from Egypt, they continually lived as though slavery still defined them. They saw themselves according to weakness rather than promise. The new generation entering Canaan symbolizes a people brought into rest, no longer wandering beneath condemnation and uncertainty. Joshua's use of flint knives is significant. Flint was associated with permanence and covenant faithfulness. The cutting away of flesh points to the removal of reliance upon human ability. The flesh throughout Scripture represents self-effort, self-righteousness, and confidence in external identity. God was teaching Israel that inheritance could never be possessed through the strength of the flesh. The location where this occurs becomes known as Gilgal because God declares, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." Egypt symbolizes bondage, oppression, and the identity of slavery. Even after Israel physically left Egypt, the reproach of Egypt lingered in their thinking. Their fears, complaints, and unbelief revealed that Egypt still held influence over them internally. The rolling away of reproach points to the complete removal of shame and accusation. God does not merely improve His people, He removes the old identity entirely. The language anticipates the reality of a new covenant people who no longer live under condemnation or distance from God. The burden of guilt and separation is rolled away by divine action, not human striving. This moment also reveals a transition between ages. The wilderness period was temporary and preparatory. It was never meant to be permanent. Israel was moving from wandering into fulfillment, from promise anticipated into promise realized. In the same way, Scripture consistently presents covenant transitions where old systems pass away and God brings His people into greater clarity and completion. The reproach being removed also speaks corporately. Israel was no longer defined by the failure of the wilderness generation. A new people stood in covenant confidence. God was forming a community marked not by fear, but by participation in His accomplished purpose. The passage ultimately centers on rest. Before Jericho falls, before battles are fought, before inheritance is divided, God establishes identity first. Victory flows from belonging. The people are reminded that the land is received as a gift rather than earned through human merit. Joshua 5:1-9 therefore becomes a picture of transformation. Shame removed, flesh cut away, wandering ended, and covenant identity renewed. God brings His people out of old bondage and into a new reality where they live from acceptance rather than striving toward it.